Hi, I'm Femi OK, and this is The Stream. Today, how are New Zealand's indigenous filmmakers decolonising cinema? We will introduce you to a group of Kiwis who are having a big impact on the silver screen. You can tweet us at AJ Stream or leave your comments in our live YouTube chat, and you too could be in the stream. New Zealand is fast becoming the go-to location for Hollywood, providing a beautiful backdrop for blockbuster after blockbuster. But beyond the cinematic vistas, the country is home to a robust group of indigenous filmmakers, actors and producers. This week, they're among a group of industry leaders meeting to discuss ways that they can tell more of their own stories. Our Malika Bilal is there.
Welcome to the Power of Inclusion. It's a two-day summit being held here in Auckland, New Zealand that's designed to ensure that diverse and inclusive spaces are the norm when it comes to the film and TV industry. More than 700 people are gathered to discuss just that. And one of the heavyweights doing the work, Tulane Jones. She's the president of director Ava DuVernay's film collective Array. It's a distribution and arts advocacy organization based in Los Angeles. She's earned film credits that include the Oscar-nominated Selma and the four-time Emmy winner and Oscar-nominated documentary 13th. Array recently acquired an acclaimed New Zealand doc. You'll hear from the director of that film in just a moment, but first, here's what Tulane had to say about why diversity in this industry is so important.
You know, when we started the company, when we started the mission, we knew what we wanted to do was to amplify people of color and women. And so when you start from the very beginning, you know, with that mindset and with that direction, it just becomes a part of what you do, and it's what we do every single day.
So how to ensure diversity and inclusion are more than just buzzwords? Tulane says, listen to diverse voices. Femi?
And we are going to be doing just that. Joining us from Auckland to discuss this, Heperi Mita. He's the filmmaker behind the documentary Merata, How Mum Decolonized the Screen. His mother, Merata Mita, was a notable Indigenous filmmaker in New Zealand. Actress Rachel House, she voiced the character of Gramma Tala in the Disney animated film Moana. She also helped create the Maori-language version of the film. And Kerry Warkia, she is a producer and actor and the brains behind the production company Brown Sugar Apple Grunt. Hello everybody, good morning, great to see you. I guess I am really curious about how you see the New Zealand film industry right now. It seems to be thriving. Kerry, you start, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think it is thriving, and I think while we have a lot of international productions, I think it's really important to continue to support the local productions, particularly the voices, the underrepresented voices, the voices of women, and the voices of people of colour. And I think I hope that there's much more of a move towards that after this summit, that there's a lot more action to do that, so that these stories can be told.
Heperi, New Zealand film industry in a nutshell, how would you describe it?
I would say, I mean, there's almost like a Venn diagram going on. There's the New Zealand film industry that supplies the world with all these big budget Hollywood productions. Then we've got the New Zealand film industry that's made for New Zealand audiences. And then we've got the ones in between that kind of reach across both bases.
So much going on. Let me remind audiences, they may not even know that New Zealand was the base for some of these movie productions. So let me take you to the movies via New Zealand. These were made in New Zealand. Take a look. Rachel, such a stunning location. What an amazing place to make films. You have been in some major films. I am wondering, as an actress in New Zealand, is this the best time ever?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we are still struggling though to have our stories be told,
Yeah.
and the emphasis on Polynesian voices here. Um, Also, unfortunately, we are still struggling to have our stories uh, be told by us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was a slogan that we heard yesterday, and I think it's something that we need to adopt over here, which is nothing about us
Us
without
without
us.
us, yeah. The
Yeah,
cry of every
yeah,
minority group around the world to be included.
of
You have
course.
made some strides, and you were in a production, a Walt Disney production, and Disney have been criticised for many, many years about how they have treated minorities and how they have othered them. And so many criticisms, we can't even begin to get into them. But you played a grandma in Moana, and this very definitely had a Polynesian touch to it, and you helped them do it even better. Let's show a little clip of your vocal work. Have a look.
When I die, I'm going to come back as one of these. Or I chose the wrong tattoo.
Why are you acting weird?
I'm the village crazy lady. That's my job.
If there's something you want to tell me, just tell me. Is there something you want to tell me?
Is there something you want to hear?
That's a good phrase for today's conversation. Rachel, how do you start? How did you start decolonizing the cinema? I can see aspects of that already in that Disney film, and all three of you are doing that right now with your work.
Yeah, I mean, look, we just have to be bold, and we've got to write our own work, and we have to challenge the funding bodies about funding work that hasn't been written by indigenous voices that are about us. That's all we can do at this stage. It's not happening as much, I will say that, and I think the New Zealand Film Commission are very willing to engage in conversations with us about our content, and they want to see, as much as we do, I think, that our work is produced and directed and written by us.
Yeah, let's be very specific then. So with that Disney film Moana, you then went out into your local community and said, we are going to make another version of this and we're going to voice it with traditional indigenous voices. Tell us how you did that.
Well, it was an idea that Taika Waititi and Chelsea Winstanley had very early on. They've got young children, and Moana was a huge hit with our people. It was a huge hit with our Polynesian people. That the visibility of us because of that film, it was significant. And I think, I do know that Disney get a lot of criticism, but really, if you look at the body of work that's coming out now, it's very inclusive. It's a giant, and we are seeing these cultures and faces, that we don't often see in such a major way. So anyway, that film Moana, it had a massive impact. It was criticized initially, and then when it came out, it was embraced because there was such recognition of ourselves.
Kerry, and Rachel, as you're talking, Kerry is nodding, Heperi is nodding. Kerry, what's behind that nod? Articulate it for me.
I just completely agree with Rachel. I think that Moana was wonderful, and it was great to see ourselves on screen, and I think great to see us in the mainstream, and to hear, for Rachel to be voicing Gramma Tala, that's she is like an icon here. So that was wonderful, and also the work that Taika and Chelsea did to have it in Te Reo Māori, and for that to be available for young New Zealanders, particularly the Maori-language. All of that's wonderful, and that is to be celebrated. We should celebrate. We should celebrate that.
I was listening to the Maori soundtrack of that last night, and it sounded absolutely beautiful. So good job there, Rachel. Let me just share this with you. Heperi, I love this tweet. To have Ava DuVernay give you some credit and kudos, beautiful thing. Ava DuVernay says, this man made a beautiful doc about his mother, the legendary Maori filmmaker Merata Mita. She believed in decolonizing movie screens. Hero. And I'm just going to scroll down to you looking very dapper here. You tell a story about your mum that is more than just a personal family story. It's a story about a determined indigenous filmmaker who was the first of her kind, shaking up the film industry. Why did you feel that this was such an important story to tell?
You know, a lot of the issues and the barriers that she was coming up against 40 years ago when she was first starting her career, I think resonate a lot today. A lot of my mum's early work was about Maori land protests, Maori rights protests, and you just need to look at what's going on in places like Hawaii with the protests at Moana. At the time I was making the film, the Dakota pipeline protests were going on, and so there was this wave of activism amongst indigenous people, and that was something that my mum was already working on quite a few decades ago, and those situations really interested me because it was like things have definitely changed in positive ways across the board in many, many ways. But there are other places in which we're still fighting fights and we're still doing the same things that were still going on, you know, for decades now. And that was one of the big motivating factors for me in actually sharing my mum's story with the rest of the world.
Let me just show a little clip here, and this is a clip from the making of, or the trailer of Heperi's film, which is called Merata, How Mum Decolonized the Screen. Have a look, have a listen.
My mother once said, "What you see when you look at an archival film are resurrections taking place."
She is the grandmother of indigenous cinema.
It was about changing history. It was about changing the way Native people, Maori people, were perceived by the rest of the world.
And does that contrast with the way you feel you're seen in New Zealand?
Very much so. I don't think people regard me as a very valuable resource here as much as they regard me as a nuisance.
Heperi, let me share this tweet with you here. Jason says, Merata built cinematic bridges and was a mentor to many. Because of her, we can think of Indigenous cinema in an international sense today. There are stories that she told about New Zealand that people were shocked that were happening in New Zealand, stories of racism, stories of Indigenous communities being left out and being seen as less than the rest of the community, or less than people who had paler skin. Those stories, do you feel that they're still relevant today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, those stories didn't go down too well here in New Zealand during my mother's time because they were quite confronting, and people didn't, you know, a lot of people want cinema to be an escape, but she was more interested in the realism of the situation facing Maori in society. So the way that she was able to continue her career, and the way that kind of, it was actually, in a strange way, almost benefited her, was that she took her stories overseas. And she found that there were many people like her, Indigenous communities around the world, who were facing similar issues. And she found allies and contemporaries in places like Aboriginal communities in Australia, Indigenous communities in Canada and Hawaii, all over the world. And so she was able to link these people together and form a bit of a network of Indigenous filmmakers around the world, so that there was content that could be shared, and a festival circuit that could be shared, where we could actually watch and relate to each other's struggles. And that level of empathy and that feeling that you're not alone in the world, that these issues of colonization aren't unique to you, I think is really important and really powerful to help support people who can sometimes be in some pretty dark places because of the results of things like colonization.
Kerry, I'm just looking at a picture here of you working. You have your own production company, you're an actress. It's almost as if you felt, if we're going to tell our stories, we're going to have to do it ourselves, and we need to be in charge. We talked about how amazing the New Zealand film scene is, but who is behind the camera? Who are making the films? Perhaps at front of the camera, we're seeing some stories from Indigenous communities, but who is controlling, who's the power? And I think that is perhaps what you're doing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really passionate about who is in the key creative roles and who's telling the stories, and I actually think that decolonizing the screen also starts with decolonizing the structures in which we get to tell those stories. You know, you're still asking Indigenous people to walk into systems of funding that are built on colonization, and so that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And the structure and model that we work with the writer directors of Waru and the writer-directors of Vai, definitely challenges that system and says, well, that might not necessarily be how we want to make work. And I think that has to be embraced. And I think, Heather Ray talked about that yesterday as well.
So, Kerry, I'm just going to slow you down because everybody in New Zealand knows all of those three people that you mentioned and the two films that you mentioned as well. The rest of us are catching up. Waru is a film that you made. Vai is a film that you made this year. Waru is a film that's a collaborative film, and it starts at 10 a.m. and it talks about the death of a child, but from different perspectives of different women, and it has vignettes of 8 different stories. I shouldn't be telling your story because that's the point of this discussion, but I want to show a little clip so that people know what we're talking about. Let's have a look at Waru.
What's she doing? Is she going rogue?
People are struggling.
What's your superpower, Mum?
Invincibility.
You're gonna start a war?
I'm gonna walk in there and I'm gonna get those kids.
So, Kerry, I feel this is an example of what decolonisation the cinema actually means. It's an easy phrase, a buzz phrase to say, but what it actually means is that the original director was going to be a male director. And then what happened?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, he was going to be a male director. That's sort of how we created it. But as we started to talk more about it, we really understood that he shouldn't be telling that story, and he shouldn't be having that power. And we wanted to give it over to Māori female writers and directors. And we wanted to have 8 in the room. We actually worked with 9 writer directors altogether, and it was really important to do that. And I think that is also part of decolonizing, is handing over the power so that those people can tell their stories and they can control what it is that we're all seeing and listening to and experiencing on screen.
Heperi, this was something that your mum did and you're really doing with your documentary too, even in the very title. What does it mean on a practical level to decolonize the cinema?
I think at a very practical level, I mean, you go back to my mother's time, people didn't even know what a Māori was. So a lot of her work was explaining the issues, explaining the things that we faced. Now, in subsequent generations, you have the work of directors like Taika Waititi, who are directing films like Thor and Jojo Rabbit and having massive international success. So I think that is part of the decolonization process. There's also another aspect of it, though, and I think that is, for many Māori in this industry, you're a contractor. You go from job to job, and it's different to be a contractor than it is to own your own production company or to have the resources and infrastructure to then be able to handle a bigger budget production. And so instead of us being employees, I think one of the issues that strikes at the heart of decolonization is actually being able to form our production companies that uphold Māori values, but also have the infrastructure needed to make a big budget production.
Let me bring in Christopher, who we talked to just a couple of hours ago, and he told us about telling his story. He's from New Zealand. Have a look, have a listen.
As a Samoa New Zealander, also filmmaker, I worked on the first feature-length film shot in Samoa, where the director, the writer, and most of the actors were all Samoan. This is the first time we were able to tell our own story without someone telling it for us.
Heperi, isn't it extraordinary we're still having firsts? Your mum was the first of so many different filmmaker. First mum with a ton of kids that she was taking around the world making films. First Maori female. There were all of these firsts from many decades ago, and we're still seeing that. Do you feel that New Zealand right now and the indigenous film community? Are they beginning to become just everyday filmmakers and there's less of the first still happening? Or is this still a big barrier that you're trying to forge through?
Oh, there's absolutely a massive barrier. And I mean...
is it money?
For Maori women... I mean, it actually comes down to simple representation behind the camera. There's only been 3 Maori women in New Zealand to have ever directed a feature-length project.
Wow.
That's from 1972 to today. 3.
Whoa.
That's it. I think you could probably count the number of Maori directors who have directed a feature-length film on both of my hands.
All right. Who's the one that we should look up his work straight away? Well, Taika gets a lot of mentions because Taika's done, what has he done? He's done Thor. What else has he done? Boy, he worked with your mum. So Taika's known out there. Who else should we look up and support in terms of directors?
I mean, I'm going back, and he's almost the older generation, but Lee Tamahori's films are extremely famous. Once Were Warriors was one of his films. He had a bit of success in Hollywood as well. Te Are Pakahi is an amazing film director, but I do actually want to give a shout out to a film that's going to be coming out soon, and that is the work of Aynsley Gardner and Briar Gray Smith. They will be the next Maori woman to direct a feature here in New Zealand, and it's been almost 30 years since the last one was made. So those are 2. It's a co-direction. They're making a film called Cousins. That's a film you should definitely support. But one of the interesting things is, despite that lack of representation, if you look at the top 10 highest grossing films in New Zealand history, 7 of them are either made by Maori directors or are adaptations of Maori stories.
That is just worth a pause, just to appreciate that, because people will support indigenous filmmakers. You just have to give them the access. All right, talking about access, this is important. Jason is a New Zealand filmmaker. He is a minority, and trying to get into the film scene is difficult. He explains why. Have a look.
Although New Zealand is making progress in some areas, there needs to be a much greater commitment to fund and support disabled people to tell our own authentic stories. I had to start my own agency, Activate, to tell stories that matter to me and my community. It's been an uphill battle that's been inaccessible that I wouldn't wish on any other aspiring disabled filmmakers. I think as a community, disabled people are demanding more. We deserve better than to be reduced to tokenism on screen. We've learned from the disability rights movement that we need disabled people to be leaders in telling our own stories. We need more disabled directors, more disabled writers, more disabled producers in the film industry. Nothing about us without us.
That phrase again, so important. Kerry, I feel that this is what you've been doing. What advice would you give to other New Zealand indigenous filmmakers, New Zealand filmmakers, about breaking through that barrier, owning your work, telling your stories?
Well, I think it's really important to talk about it. So, I mean, the summit inclusion, Inclusion Power of Inclusion Summit is a good start. But people have to not be it has to be confirmed by the people who have the power that when people start to talk about that, when they start to challenge that, that doesn't mean that they're going to be blacklisted. It doesn't mean that they're not going to get a job. And I think that fear exists, and it shouldn't exist. We should be able to challenge one another and speak. That is what will help us to do better.
Rachel, final words of encouragement. What would you say to your colleagues out there in the industry in New Zealand trying to do what you're doing?
Just be brave. Be brave and get on with it. And we need to come together a lot more, I think, and have these discussions.
Yeah.
I think there is, going back to something you said before about why isn't there more the Māori directors? There's trust issues with producers, particularly non-Indigenous producers.
Yeah.
So we just need to really challenge why that is, but also make our own work.
Yeah.
We just need to, break away.
Yep, I hear it. Thank you so much, Heperi, Rachel, Kerry. People have been watching your work, they've been quoting it and also talking about you in this conversation. 18 Cube says, it's amazing seeing what New Zealand is doing. We're working to do something resounding with our movie industry here in Nigeria. We're inspiring people around the world. Thank you, guests. Thank you for community for watching. See you next time.